That was Lorraine. Now, we're going to talk about a very sensitive subject. We talked about it part 1 a couple weeks ago. We'll do part 2. And it's a subject that you may not quite understand the reason of the social implications of it. However, you should try to begin to look at it and try to understand. You're in the age of the woman, Aquarius, spiritual age. And at this point, it is the feminine principle in all which is raising itself in men as well. And so then you have this great social question concerning homosexuality. And the only reason that I deal with it is because I've seen the fundamentalist religions deal with it on the basis of guilt and fear and hate. And I don't really believe that anything should come out of the Bible or be connected with God that has to do with fear or guilt or hate. There was an interesting article in USA Today. I'm not going to date it because these tapes, sometimes you may be looking at this tape 2 years from now. God knows when. But anyhow, there's an interview with Mel White. He's an author. You know what he does? He's a ghostwriter. In other words, if I wanted to write a book, I am not a writer. I would give basically the idea, Mel White would sit down and write the book. He's a ghostwriter. He came out recently and made the statement that he was gay. Come out of the closet. The interesting part about this, he is a ghostwriter for some very prestigious religious people. Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. And so on his first Sunday last year, Mel White addressed his employers, his old employers, to Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and my other old clients on the religious right, whose anti-gay rhetoric is killing us, and to Billy Graham and my other old friends whose silence helps but not all that much, I say this: I will not hate you, for Jesus said love your enemies. I will not plot revenge against you, for Jesus says do good to those who despitefully use you and persecute you. And I will not stoop to using your techniques, half-truths, hyperbole, and lies, for Jesus said the truth will set you free. But this too I promise: I will not remain silent any longer. The religious right is wrong, wrong about the Bible, wrong about Jesus, wrong about God, wrong about the church, wrong about the family, and seriously wrong about gay and lesbian people. We are not the enemy. The real enemies are those who teach hate instead of love, those who use misinformation and fear tactics to raise money, those who play on ancient superstitions to destroy lives and wound families. All we want is our God-given right to live and to love with integrity and to take our place in the community as responsible neighbors. And faithful friends, Mel White, I thought this was interesting how nature works. I mean, of all the people, this guy is going to write for Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. Basically, that's where I'm coming from. Nobody's asking anybody's approval. Nobody's asking anybody's permission. But if I was to look at this Bible and say, wait a minute, somebody tell me, what the heck does this mean here? There's nobody around. I mean, everybody that was there 2,000 years ago, there's nobody around to tell me what this means. So I raise questions. Now, the point is, do I have a right to? Open to page 782. It's important that you see for yourself what it says. It says in Matthew chapter 7, page 782. Okay. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, Jesus says, ask and it'll be given. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it'll be open to you. In other words, question. And when you question, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask the serious questions. You have to ask the questions that'll even make you sit up and say, whoa. But that's not going to cut it. You can't stop there. You've got to ask the question. You've got to look at whoever this is that you're following and ask serious questions. Say, what are the implications of this? What does this mean? I want to know. Or at least I want to try to find out, where is this coming from? What's this all about? Sexuality, whether it be heterosexuality, whether it be homosexuality, whatever, it comes out of a place that is a part of the human makeup called the carnal mind. We've seen religious fundamentalists place homosexuals, lesbian people under the guilt of God by saying this is sin, this is sin, this is sin. But yet we looked last week, and real quickly we'll just recap. If you look at page 924, and you look in the book of Romans, Romans chapter 8, the Apostle Paul makes an interesting statement. He talks about the seat of all sexuality, whether it be homosexual, heterosexual, and the Apostle Paul makes this statement concerning the carnal mind, where sex comes from. The carnal mind is enmity against God. That means there's a mutual hatred. It is not subject to the law of God, neither can it be. It is not subject to the law of God. If it's not subject to the law of God, and it can't be subject to the law of God, how can people whose actions emanate out of the carnal mind be declared sinners? How could there be a violation of law if we're finding out that this particular aspect of the human brain is not subject to that law? I didn't put a carnal mind in your head. I didn't put a carnal mind in my head. It was put in there by the Creator. That thing which is not capable of obeying the law of the Creator was put in my head by the Creator. Now, if that's the case, then whose fault is it? Whose problem is it, if that is the case? There's another aspect of human sexuality that comes out of the ancient times, people referred to as eunuchs. Just real quick, we'll look at this before we get into something extremely sensitive. Eunuch is a castrated male, but in those days it not only meant a castrated male, it meant an effeminate male. It meant what you would call today someone who's gay. And Jesus Christ made a statement about those people. Page 796. Page 796, and in that statement, Jesus Christ makes the following. All I'm saying to you is, what kind of a game are we playing? If he said these things, doesn't the church, which claims to be followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, have a responsibility to tell people, Jesus said this? I have never heard a preacher, I've never heard a Falwell, I've never heard a Robertson, I've never heard a Pope or anybody else, or Billy Graham, ever make this statement that Jesus said this. And you never have either. But he did. And you have to understand he was talking about those people, many of those people that you today call gay. And look what he says in Matthew 19 and verse 12. For there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. They're born that way. And here I hear all of the Falwells and the Robertsons and all of these people saying, oh, this is a matter of choice. It has nothing to do with the person. That's not what Jesus said. He says they're born that way. And then he turns around in the very next statement and he says, and there are some which were made that way of men, some which developed that way out of their life because of the way they were raised, because of their parents, because of whatever the circumstances were. But then this is the amazing thing. This thing which the church calls evil, this thing which the church says is a diabolical work of the devil, Jesus makes the statement then, and then there be eunuchs which have made themselves so for the kingdom of heaven. He that is able to receive it, receive it. What's that all about? And he looked at people, and a lot of people were looking just like the Falwells and the Robertsons and getting the smoke coming out of the ridge. He said, if you can't hear it, you can't hear it, but get off their back. He that is able to receive it, receive it, because there's not a whole lot of people that can receive it. Some are born that way. Some are made that way. And some make themselves that way for the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that interesting? Now, are we allowed to discuss the sexuality of Jesus? How quiet. Have you ever heard anybody discuss it? You know why you've never heard anybody discuss it? Because religion instantly considers human sexuality as dirty, filthy, and a sin, and can have no connection with the Christ. They don't understand human sexuality. We're led to think, for the most part, that nothing he did. He had no physical feelings. Let me show you something. Go to page 787, Matthew chapter 11. And I'm here to ask you to be objective and adult enough to look and question everything, including Jehoshua. Everything. That's what he said you should do. You should ask. You should question. If you got any questions about who he was, what he is, you ask. And you don't mince any words. You're going to say, look, I'm going to put this right on the table. You don't be like a religious person. Well, we're not allowed to say that. Well, I can't. You got to get those thoughts out of you. You get those thoughts in your head and you ask. It doesn't make any difference how bizarre the question is. You ask it. Because you have authority to ask it, and the authority comes from the same book. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 19. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a man gluttonous and a winebibber. You know what a winebibber means? You're a drunk. I had a guy write me about that. He says, you call him a winebibber. That looks like I had to get a dictionary on a computer, CompuServe, and print it out and said to the guy, look what it says, winebibber, one who drinks to excess. He was evidently, whoever this guy was, where he was, maybe he was seen strolling down the boulevard in Jerusalem with a bag on. Can't think of that. Ruins your religion to think of it. Let it kill your religion. Because then maybe when you think of it, you'll get to the reality of human nature, and maybe you'll be able to relate, and maybe you'll be able to take this guy by the hand and hang on to him, because then maybe he'll mean something real to you. He was considered a drunk. And you know who considered him to be a drunk? Religious people. You're hanging out with this guy is going to... Here? Yeah, can you see them down in the Jerusalem A-Go-Go, and somebody's looking in the window? And there's a guy with his arm on the bar leaning down the far end. That's the only begotten Son of God. Sure. Sure he is. Huh? He was considered one who drank to excess. Well, what about sex? We know, according to the observers, the witnesses, they said he drank too much. What about sex? Did you ever hear anybody discuss his sexual activity? Did he have any? Let me show you something. Go to page 979. You're in the book of Hebrews. I'm going to ask you to ask yourself a question. You don't have to smile. You don't have to look up. You can look down. You can do what they do in these other churches. Everyone close their eyes. No looking around, everybody privately. Do you have any sexual energy? Do you ever feel inside of yourself these urges? Get up here. You, above all, are the one that I'm considering. What did you just say?
Don't look at me.
How old are you?
87.
Yeah, going on 33. Yeah,
87.
That's right.
Yeah. Watch out for him, ladies. You're at the right. This is the reason I ask you the question. Talking about Jesus, it says on page 979, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but what was in all points tempted like as we are. And then it says, yet without sin. What does that mean? Sex is sin? If it was sin, why was it made? And if it was made just for children, why does it feel so doggone good? Why? No, I'm serious. Why? What is this? What is this that is so beautiful, that is so much a part of you, and you can look at me, it is as much a part of you as your breath, it is as much a part of you as your microphone, it is as much a part of you as your food, it is as much a part of you as the very air that you breathe, and yet sometimes there comes this feeling of there's something wrong, there's something evil, there's something, but it says he was tempted in all ways, but yet he was not controlled by that which was his emotions. That's what it means without sin. Doesn't mean he didn't have sex. It's normal. Can you jump up and down and say, here we are in church on Sunday, and it's sex is okay. Hey, sex. You've been wanting to do that all of your life. From the first day they said they don't touch it, and you couldn't stop touching it. Is that it? See? And once we can all say that, then we say, hey, it's okay. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. God knew what he was doing all along. Guy hooks up the plumbing and everybody else says, don't touch it. But if he was tempted in all ways, sexually, how? Homosexually or heterosexually? Hung around with 12 guys. He had some female friends that he was close to. But I'll show you something. There's only one that it says in this book he truly loved. I'm asking the question. Is that the answer? Whenever you said it was him, say, yeah! Where are you calling from? Jesus has returned. He's alive and been seen in Key West. Isn't it great to be free that way you can just talk and be, God's sakes. Watch, go to page 879. You've known that for a while. Now, John chapter 13, verse 23. Now there was, come on with me, there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. One of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Go to verse 25 of that same 13. He then, lying on Jesus' breast, said unto him, Lord, who is this? Paint the picture for yourself, if you would. Many of you would go into a place where you'd see a public place and people, and you would see one guy with his head lying on the breast of another guy, and you would be disgusted. Can you paint the picture? This is your Lord, with the one that he loved more than anybody else, with his head lying on his breast. Don't paint a dirty picture. It's not. That's where we're wrong about homosexuality. That's where we're wrong about heterosexuality. It immediately becomes a dirty, filthy thing. It's not. It's love. What I'm saying here is if the picture is painted by the Bible this way, then I challenge the religious bigots on the far right, the Falwells and the Pat Robertsons, to shut up and follow that which is the one who they claim to be the Lord. Page 887. John chapter 21 and verse 20. Then Peter, turning about, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, following, which was the one who also leaned on his breast at supper and said, Lord, which is it? Which is he that betrays me? And then there's an interesting thing. Peter became jealous. Do you know that? Peter became jealous of John. Peter, seeing him, verse 21 says, what shall this man do? And Jesus said to him, if I want that he waits till I come, what is it to you? If I want him to wait for me, what is it to you? I simply say, who was this one that laid his head on Jesus' breast, and who is this one that Jesus loved the most, and who was and what was this all about? There's another story in the Old Testament, which is an interesting story, and it's about King David. Of course, King David went all different directions, but anyhow. He had a strange relationship with a young man by the name of Jonathan. Go to page 252. First Samuel chapter 18 you'll find there. It says in verse 1, came to pass, blah, 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 that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Loved him. The one that Jesus loved was John. The one that Jonathan loved was David. Look at verse 3. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. What was the covenant? What was this promise to one another? They made a vow to one another. What was it? Verse 4, and Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, even his own, even to his sword, to his bow, and to his girdle. And look at verse, go to page 253, 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 1. And Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, about killing David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. Delighted much in David. This love of male for male. See, this is what you have to understand. Because you've been so brainwashed by the system that when people, you immediately think of some sexual thing and some dirty thing, and just, you can't get into your mind this love. And it may not be your love, but nobody is asking it to be your love. There is something that moves within people. I was telling people, there is a story, you know, we don't understand nature. We don't understand the science of nature. And we make these rules and regulations, and we come into these damn churches, and we follow these things, and we put people under guilt, and we point fingers at people and condemn people to hell. There are stories. If you watched, what was it, Arts and Entertainment, or one of these channels last week, when I have a copy of the tape, and I'll be more than happy to show it to you. There is a species of lizard in which there are no males in the entire species. And they showed on television 2 female lizards coming together, making love, and one of them got pregnant. How could that be? Who did this? God created that. There's a species, the seahorse, in which the male gets pregnant and gives birth. There is a species of barnacle. I'm telling you this, and I got the television. The barnacles attach themselves to these rocks, hundreds of them. It's like an apartment house. And they're all male and female. And one barnacle will send out a penis that's about 40 feet long, going down around to see what's going on next door with the barnacles down the street. What are you today? I'm female. All right, here we go. This is nature. It's true. That same barnacle tomorrow might say something coming down the road to him. Hey, I'm Marie today. All right, here we go. This is the way it is. You don't understand science. You don't understand nature. You don't understand the reality of things, and yet you make people in robes make up rules and regulations and say you don't have the slightest idea of how God has created this universe. And yet he puts in the book that this one, who was the epitome of the Godhead, who lived the Godhead. I find no fault in Jeshua in anything he did, and if he was ever a picture of the Christ, it is Jeshua, it is Jesus, and yet he loved one more than he loved anybody else, and his name was John, and he laid on his breast. You're going to have a lot of rude awakenings sometime if Falwell gets up there to the gate and Bruce lets him in. Hi-ho, Jerry. Who knows? It's a deep love. It's not a sexual, morbid love. It's a love for person to person, but it can be male to male. Now, what about Paul? The Apostle Paul. We got Jesus, maybe. We got Saul and David and Jonathan. Interesting, Paul had a strong male attraction. And actually, I'll tell you something, in this book, he had a contempt for women. The Apostle Paul, who is one of the most paramount writers in the book, has a contempt for women. Page 934. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. It is good for a man not to touch a woman. You see that? Look at it again. What's he going to touch? What's the man going to touch? The apostle who wrote the Bible said it is good not for a man to not touch a woman. Now what is he going to touch? He doesn't say what it is good for a man to touch. He just says don't touch women. Then he goes on accommodating those who, verse 2, to avoid fornication. If you got to go ahead, in other words, go ahead and marry to prevent fornication. In other words, it's an evil marriage to prevent a greater evil, fornication. That's what he's saying. And I can't control you people. Be like me. Don't mess with women. But I'm going to show you something about what he said that's got to let you walk out this door wondering what he was doing. Okay, you're on page 934. Go to page 938. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. I just want to run some things real quickly by you, and not a lot of Bible jumping. Look at verse 5. Every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Okay? Verse 6. For a woman be not covered, let her be shorn. In other words, what he's saying there, if you don't have something on your head, you should be shaved and your head should be bald. 11:6. What does it say? We just did 11:7. Man should not cover his head. Look at this, ladies. Huh? Man should not cover his head for as much as he is the image of glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. Are you sad? Do you know what the worst part of this, ladies? Ladies, I'm not just talking to you now. You went to church all of your life and sat, and then you get up and sing Amazing Grace. Excuse me. This is amazing, all right? It's amazing that you listened to it. It's amazing that you sat there and had people tell you you're going to heaven or you're going to hell based on being degraded. They sat there and they read this to you and degraded you, and they come back and brought your kids. Brought your kids. Oh, you're going to listen to the pastor. What else has the pastor got to say? Listen to this one. Verse 8, 11:8. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. Verse 9. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman was created for the man. Washing socks, stuff like that. Stirring pea soup. Cleaning kitty litter. You'll go to heaven. Keep the kitty litter clean. Keep the soup stirred. Change the diapers, and you'll go to heaven. Let me show you something. Go to page 969. 969. Just do this. It's worthwhile for you to do it because you got to see. 1 Timothy chapter 2. 1 Timothy chapter 2. Verse 11. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. Just keep quiet, Ethel. Oh, Ethel, I wish you were in Paul's church. You'd have said, yeah, you'd have been subject. Yeah. This is degrading, ladies. I don't know if you know about it, but you're being degraded with that type of talk. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. That's not right. Look at verse 12. Look at verse 12. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. I suffered. I don't allow a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but be in silence. You have nothing to say. You're a woman. You must be dumb. You can't be spiritual. The man had a contempt for woman. Look at verse 14. Adam was not deceived. The woman being deceived was in the transgression. In other words, he blames the whole thing. Now here is Paul totally degrading women, right? Yet he turns around on page 919, which is Romans chapter 1. Okay? Romans chapter 1 and verse 26. He turns around, he says, God gave them into vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the women, burned in their lust one to another. What was he? Now I want to ask you something. He said, don't touch the women. He obviously had contempt for women. Yet he talked about burning for one another, man for man. But now I want you to go with me. You're the judge. This is the best we can do. All we got is the Bible. But thank God it does tell, and it speaks the truth. I want you to go to page 924, and I want you to look at something. We said out of the carnal mind comes all sexuality, both heterosexual and homosexual. Here's a guy that says, don't touch women. He's coming against men. Where's he coming from? Look at Romans chapter 7, look at verse 14. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. Here he's saying, the Apostle Paul is saying, I am carnal. In other words, I am sensual. That's what he's saying. I am sensual. They say don't touch it, but this is the way I am. This is the guy that wrote this. Now abides faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love, but I've got a problem. I want you folks that read this Bible to know this is a Bible, and you can buy these in all the Christian bookstores, but I'm the primary writer. I got a problem. Look what it says in verse 15. For that which I do, I allow not. In other words, I go to church on Sunday, and I say to people, don't touch that. But you know what? I touch it. And I say, don't touch them. But you know what? I touch them. Here's a guy that had the guts to admit this. He said, the things that I don't allow other people to do, I do. So what does he say in verse 17? So now, it's not me that does it. It's the sin that dwells in me. The devil made me do it. The devil did it, not me. I knew when I woke up in that room, the devil made me go there. That devil. Look at verse 18. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, dwells no good thing. For to will is present, I know what I should do, but how to perform that, I can't find it. Here's the guy telling you what to do. He's telling you what to do, and he's saying, I can't control myself. Read that again. In my flesh dwells no good. In other words, I can't control it. For the will is present, I know I shouldn't do this, but how to perform that which is good, I don't know. In other words, I can't stop. Say. Paul never had any expressed feeling of love for a woman. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, I see what I'm going to do. I'm going to, because it's a little bit late, I'm going to fly with this a little bit. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, he calls Timotheus my beloved son. Ephesians chapter 6, 21, he calls Tychicus a beloved brother. Colossians 4, verse 9, Onesimus a beloved brother. 2 Timothy 1:2 to Timothy, my dearly beloved son. Philemon 1:1, Philemon, our dearly beloved. Go to page 976. I want to just show you. In other words, what I'm saying, that all of his beloveds are boys. Every one of this guy's beloveds are boys, and he just got done telling you he's got a problem. Do you know what I'm saying to you? The man said he's got a problem. It's a problem sexually because it's his carnal problem. And all he's doing is finding beloveds by the names of guys. Go to page, what did I say? Well, you must have wrote this. Go to page 976. I want you to see something about Philemon, known as Phil by the guys in town. What he says about Phil. Look at verse 16. Not now as a servant, but above a servant, a brother beloved, specially to me, both in the flesh and in the Lord. Look at that. Friends, look at that. Both in the flesh and in the Lord. Come on. All I'm saying is get off of everybody's back and read the Bible as it's, there are questions in there. Here's a guy that puts down women with a hate, calls every guy in town beloved, says he's got a problem with his own sensuality, sexuality, his carnal nature, and then he says, this guy is my beloved both physically and in God. You see, but this type of a statement today would bring the wrath of Falwell down on the heads of a person. Let me show you something. How is God portrayed? The mystical God. Go to page 1002, Revelation chapter 1, verse 13. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, male, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. You know what that means? Had a bra on. Was wearing a bra. Know why? You don't look at this literally. This is the mind and the spirit together, portrayed as the Son of Man with a bra. And flowing from that which are the nipples comes the milk. And that is portrayed throughout the Bible. And the milk is that which is the spiritual wisdom. Wearing a bra. If you study ancient literatures, you'll find some very famous names who were considered outright, downright homosexuals. I'm going to name a few for you. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, the man who did the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, Michelangelo, who created the nude male statues all over the Vatican. The one who painted the most precious Christian picture in the history of religious art, Leonardo da Vinci, who was not only a homosexual, but he was also an astrologer. If you look on your Bible, and you look at the front page of the Bible, it says King James Version. King James I, who authored that Bible, was a homosexual. Charles XII of Sweden, Frederick the Great of Russia, Ludwig II of Bavaria, some writers that you know, Oscar Wilde, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Tennessee Williams, Walt Whitman, and the guy who wrote some of the most beautiful piano pieces that have ever been authored, Frédéric Chopin. All homosexuals. Immediately, our culture feels that a male who experiences love and attraction for another male must be deprived. There's a guy by the name of J. Addington Simons who wrote A Problem of Modern Ethics. He says, if Greek history did not contradict this supposition, a little patient inquiry into contemporary manners would suffice to remove it. The ancients in Greece were especially those who manifested a state of brotherly love. They considered homosexuality nearer to the perfect physical state. There is a degenerated state in sexuality. We all know that. Sexual aspects become degrading, and we all know that too. There's a problem we're going to deal with coming up in a few weeks called pedophilia, which runs rampant in some places, religious places. I'm going to give you a shocker. Put this one on your refrigerator. Aristotle, quote, men should shun their wives and indulge in boy love. It will deal with the population explosion. This isn't Joe from the local bookstore. This is Aristotle. That was also part of the put down of women in Christianity, that women can contribute only to the lustful pleasures of man. And unfortunately, while the beautiful soul could only be found in the male form. I'll show you something sexual in the Bible. I'll leave it to your imagination. But when you think of what it says, I'll tell you if you want to look at me, if you're right. And we'll end this with this, page 689. Because some of the things you hear about in some of the magazines and some of the local preachers as if this just started today. Ezekiel chapter 16. and verse 17. This is to the ladies. You have taken your fair jewels of my gold and of my silver, which I gave you, and you made to yourself images of men, and you committed whoredoms with them. The only thing they didn't have in those days was electricity. Do you see? And the point that we came to discuss in an extremely sensitive topic was to do exactly what Yeshua had said to do. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to question. And then look at the book which has been twisted so, which says things that would make you stand back and say, hey, what do you mean? And there's nobody here to answer the question, what does it mean? And yet, the people will take this book and beat men and women of a different sexual persuasion down into the dirt with it, never ever addressing the very points that were addressed this morning to question. I admire the fact that Paul in the Bible said, hey, look, I'll be the first to admit, I tell you to do things, I can't do them. And I tell you not to do things, and I'm doing those things. That's pretty gutsy. It's pretty good, pretty decent. And if I have to look at someone that you could follow off the ends of the earth as a teacher, Yeshua, Jesus is the person. And yet, by looking at the drunkenness and his affections for one man, I then have to bring myself to the point of addressing his teachings and hear him say, some are born that way, some are made that way, some make themselves that way for the kingdom. And I have to sit down and say, what do you mean? And this guy that was lying so close to you, did you really love him that deeply? You see, there's a statement back in the book of Isaiah, and it says they call evil good and good evil. We don't know. And you know why we don't understand the nature of sex and our own sexuality, and why we have practically destroyed children and teenagers by our ignorance? Because we've never sat down with nature. And we've never loved nature. We've never studied nature. We've never seen how the things are created. Those lizards, they don't choose anything. They're created. Those barnacles, they don't choose anything. They're created. That little horse, that male that gives birth, didn't choose that. Was created that way. Was created by the same Creator who has created you, created me, and made us the way we are. To finally understand it. And our creation is given, and some are different than others, because we are to love them all, to break down the barriers of all of this. Nobody's asking for how you prefer your lifestyle, simply asking to allow everyone to enjoy their lifestyle and know that there is no condemnation in here at all, at all. In fact, the heroes that wrote this were well aware and obviously involved. So be free and let the other person be free, and lift each one of us up in Christ, and let the world change and let the world live, and let us flow in the understanding of nature together. It doesn't give any license to go around abusing or doing things. But it does give two adults consenting with one another the license to be free, without any interference from you, me, the government, or religion. And that's what the Lord Christ said. If you do what I say, you'll know the truth. And the truth will set you free. Thank you very much for sharing this time with us. And thank you.